you may not have noticed, but in this society, they're not handing out rights. Ask black people. Ask members of any sexual minority. They don't hand out rights in this society. And we, meaning we psychedelic people, by and large, this isn't always true, but by and large, we tend to be white and middle class. A translation of those two terms into gutless would not be inappropriate. We have the most to lose. And so we're not given to hurling ourselves into the breach or building barricades in the street to hurl our bodies against the machine. Nevertheless, if you don't claim your political birthright, it will never be given to you. And black people and gay people and American Indians, Native Americans, all of these people have learned that you don't go on bended knee to petition the official culture for your rights. You have to take them. And people ask me, how can you stand up and say the things you do? Why don't they take you away? They don't take me away because they're more chicken shit than you think. They're more off balance than you think. They're more uncertain of themselves than you think. The legitimacy viewpoint is established in their minds. Drugs are illegal and
Ladies and gentlemen.
You're having a nightmare. What if it's true?
Ladies and gentlemen.
Alan, it's a possibility, isn't it?
The very word secrecy is repugnant.
Secrets.
In a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers,
constant, extreme danger,
which are cited to justify it. Even today, there is little value in opposing the threat of a closed society by imitating its arbitrary restrictions. Even today, there is little value in ensuring the survival of our nation if our traditions do not survive with it. And there is very grave danger,
extreme danger,
that an announced need for increased security.
This is Conspiracy Queries with Alan Park.
Will be seized upon by those anxious to expand its meaning to the very limits of official censorship and concealment. That I do not intend to permit to the extent that it's in my control.
You're crazy.
And no officious, high or low, civilian or military, should interpret my words here tonight as an excuse to censor the news, to stifle dissent, to cover up our mistakes.
Isn't the Pentagon suspicious that all the buildings blow up?
Or to withhold from the press and the public
I think you're just looking at things for the first time.
the facts they deserve to know.
You've had your whole f***ing life to think things over. What good's a few minutes more gonna do you now?
The facts they deserve to know. They deserve to know.
Welcome to Green Crush Conspiracy Queries with Alan Park. Thanks for joining us on this sunny, freezing cold Toronto Tuesday. We just had a big dump of snow last night. And when I say snow, I mean precipitation. This is not an all-drug show. This is primarily focusing on cannabis. Welcome to 234 King Street East the Pacific Junction Hotel, live from downtown Toronto, East End. There he is. So here we go. We're going to raise our fists. We're going to raise our temporal lobe. We're going to raise our cerebellum. We're going to raise all kinds of pieces and bits and bobs of our brain that I think a lot of people aren't using all the time. I know I'm guilty of that. And I'd like to do it more often in a more concentrated effort. Luckily, cannabis is here. Hooray! All of a sudden, it's legal. It's going to be great. No, it's not, actually. If you're listening from another planet, please understand that we had this substance. This is going to be a segment. If you're a regular listener to the show, thanks a lot. But I appreciate that. Maybe you can get a coffee or a muffin or something. You've already heard what I'm about to say. I'm just addressing the interstellar species that may or may not be listening to us. So on the off chance that someone from outer space is checking into the show for the first time, let me just run this down for you how it is. I had stage 4 cancer. Technically speaking, I still do have stage 4 cancer because once they give you that particular designation, they don't take it away. But what was taken away was my scheduled funeral of around December 2014, and I'm into my third fantastic year of not being encumbered by this body-eating disease known as stage 4 terminal aggressive advanced cancer. And I did a lot of that work with our friend here, cannabis. And this is a plant that we grow, as you folks from outer space realize. And let me just zoom in a little tighter for you. You might not be able to believe this, but it used to be illegal. For about 80 years, a bunch of lunkheads took it away from everybody so we wouldn't be able to use it. And unfortunately, taking that out of the food chain has caused a lot of the animals that used to eat it and ingest the CBDs from the plant and other healthful properties and left them without it, which they replaced with corn and soy, and then later genetically engineered corn and soy. And meanwhile, we weren't ingesting this nutrient anymore, this food. And that was a huge mistake if you're not profiteering from pharmaceutical remedies to take care of the fact that everybody's been getting sick from this nutritional deficit. So now a lot of people have realized in this decade, which may seem just like a blip to you interstellar folks, but it's been at several lifetimes for hundreds of thousands, millions of people. And we're just starting to push this thing back into legality. So once again, it was legal, and then it was not legal. And now we're sort of transitioning back into a legal phase of cannabis consumption. And of course, that means that to do this, to remove all of the punishments, the life-ruining consequences that a lot of the folks in what we like to call policing have laid on us, the first thing they needed to do was consult with those folks to see if it was okay. They immediately panicked because they realized as soon as we're not enforcing marijuana arrests and laws surrounding it, and we're not enforcing that, and we don't have that in our job description, what's going to happen is when you get the spreadsheets out, the Excel time sheets, you're going to add up each man-hour work hour for every single police officer, and what's going to happen when you crunch the numbers and do the math is we won't need as many police officers on the job. Logic, right? I mean, that's a thing we're still using, some of us. If we can find it, it was taken out of the schools. But what I'm trying to say is, if you look at a spreadsheet of expenditures in a police budget, certain of those man-hours are going to tally up and be a result of cannabis enforcement laws. And now that we've gotten rid of that, or we're transitioning to it, you would think we would free up all that space. Imagine if you were eating ice cream all the time. And it was putting on a lot of weight, and it was doing things to your skin, and you thought, I got to stop eating this stuff. You wouldn't go to the dairy and say, okay, look, I'm not going to be eating this anymore, so how can you control the next phase of me not eating it in my life? And you turn to the dairy, and the dairy's not interested in this, so they... You know what I'm saying? So it's ridiculous that we're doing this. We're consulting with cops to see if it's okay and how we can be allowed to use something that they have prosecuted us for, beaten us with sticks, sometimes taken it from us, locked us up, embarrassed us in front of other people, caused us to lose our jobs, caused us to have stress in the family, caused little kids to be scared as shit when cops bust into the room, and put someone in jail for something that's now all of a sudden legal. But now also we have to consult with the cops because they need to shore up the man hours. They can't possibly have it that we're actually running around free with this stuff. This is the fallacy of legalization. This is the decriminalization that's not really happening. It's a recriminalization. They're moving one set of punitive laws into the dumpster and replacing them with several more other sets of laws. So that's what they're doing here on Earth. Imagine if you weren't going to be riding around in horses and buggies anymore, and instead you were going to be moving to automobiles, as they did at the turn of the previous century. You don't run to the blacksmiths and you don't run to the horse and buggy people to find out how to make them still use horse and buggies and blacksmithery. You just move into the cars. And that's what happens all the time, but somehow or other, I suppose the police unions have a stake in this. The officers themselves, there'll just be less to do. Less harassment, less fun. And I don't know why that has to be the case. And I'm shouting at the top of my lungs around the world as best I can on this planet. Whatever shape it is, it doesn't matter to me. There's a big, you guys know you're in outer space. Are we flat or are we round? You've got a better vantage point. I don't personally care because the folks running this place are friggin' monsters, even if it's a hexagon. So, and it probably is a little bit of that also. So here we are, folks, out in outer space doing a show that is trying to explain to people how when something is illegal and then it becomes legal, we don't need people adding more laws to it and making it more punitive, especially when the cops involved before are now actually profiting from it in a monetary sense. So thanks for listening in outer space, and now I can get my regular listeners to come back to the listening area, whether that be your earbuds or your kitchen one of those kind of things underneath the sink while you're washing dishes. That's a good way to do it. When you're doing something else, when you're cutting the lawn or what have you, it's a good time to listen to a podcast. Before we get going too much further, I'd like to say to the folks that are listening to us on iTunes or whatever your subscription service, do us a big, juicy favor, would you please? Thank you for subscribing so far. It's been great getting to know a lot of you, sending emails. But can you do me this favor? Can you go onto your iTunes and find your subscription to either Green Crush with Alan Park or Conspiracy Queries with Alan Park, because this is Green Crush Conspiracy Queries with Alan Park. So wherever you are subscribed, just please go there, check it out, say something nice about the show, but more importantly, disengage, disconnect from the show. Say, that's it, I'm unsubscribing. And then immediately resubscribe. It'll only take a couple of seconds. We're trying to build enough of a base and draw enough attention that we can continue to put this word out. So I'll give you a second to do that now. And there you go. Of course, at the beginning of the show, we had Terence McKenna. He is a researcher, a scientific, well, I guess I won't use the word scientific. That might have offended him. I will use the word that he was an experimenter of all kinds of different substances and has wonderful things to say about mushroom consumption, cannabis consumption, a lot of different DMT itself, the property in various different ingestibles that help you see beyond the facade of control that so many of us label under. Sadly, Terence is no longer with us, but if you're going to relax sometime and just sit back in a chair and you want to kill some time and you don't feel like going to Netflix and sitting there going title, and never choosing anything, just put on Terence McKenna on YouTube, and a lot of things will come up, and see what you make of it. Fascinating guy, hell of a researcher, no longer on this plane, but hopefully he is still listening to some and hopefully all of what we're saying here. I really do look up to the guy. He went where boldly went where no man can go, and tells us all about the results from being there. On the show today as a guest, I'd like to thank CannabisDaily.co. We were speaking with those folks who have been on board with us a whole bunch as far as we've been pushing this boulder up a hill, and have referenced this next guest, Todd Scattini. He is a fascinating man, and I've had the pleasure of speaking with him on the weekend to make sure we're all good. Todd's the CEO of Harvest 360. Now, you might not know what that means, but Harvest relates to cannabis, and 360 means all the way around. A strategic advisor for Althea Capital Investments, so there's money going into this industry, so every single politician who's ever lied, and there are countless number of those, who have said things like, well, there's nothing good could come from this cannabis thing, nothing really contributed to society, and meanwhile there's all this artistic input, and now a financial investment. And I'd like all those punks to step up to the line who've been dumping on this notion of cannabis for all these decades and bloody well apologize for A, being on the wrong side of history, and B, causing a lot of other people who knew they were on the wrong side of history while these users were on the right side of history, and guess who paid for it? The people using the substance, and now the people who have been keeping the substance away from us are somehow profiting from it. None of this is right. All of it deserves correction, and we'll talk a lot about this with Todd Scattini. He's also the European representative of Charlotte's Web Botanicals. Of course, you know Charlotte's Web is a fantastic strain of cannabis remedy for all kinds of horrendous diseases, and designed for little children. It doesn't have the THC in there. It was really hard to come up with this particular strain as well because it's illegal to do the research when you have an illegal substance. So the basic stupid argument goes, this stuff's illegal. Yeah, but it's helping me with my cancer. There's no evidence of that. That's anecdotal. Okay, then let's do research. We're not allowed to. It's illegal. And around you go. And we're just sick of this crap now. We're moving into different areas. So I'd like to welcome this fantastic guy was in the military, and he's just out of the military of America. His name is Todd Scattini. He is an unconventional U.S. Army combat veteran and an experienced multilingual, that's impressive, I'm always impressed by that, military diplomat with over 13 years of service in Europe. He's a versatile and focused and highly skilled professional on a mission to captivate the emerging cannabis industry and help facilitate international trade of cannabis technologies and all of the wonders. Not just the wonder the plant has to offer, all of the wonders, and we're going to get into all of the wonders with Todd when he gets here. He's the hemp colonel. That's what they call him. And I'm sure a lot of people in the halls of power are going to be disappointed and frustrated at this interview on the one hand, and let's hope the open-minded of them, if they do exist, can have their mindset shifted. I mean, here's a guy helping you alleviate pain, post-traumatic stress disorder, pharmaceutical dependence. So get over yourselves and understand that Todd's a wonderful guy. His effort is noble. He's not just a guy on the street. He knows a few things, and we're very much looking forward to his presence on the show. He'll be on shortly. And right now, I'd like to play a little lick for why it's a good idea to promote cannabis on the one. There's so many reasons against it. We're going to be hearing a lot of nonsensical education control thought patterns from the police-based mindset in Canada that's pushing this thing through in a very regimented, don't have fun, buy it in a crummy package, go home, don't enjoy it, smoke it in front of your kids kind of product. But once this system gets flowing, you're going to have some answers in an economic sense. The numbers are going to be huge. By this time in 10 years, it's going to be astounding what happens to the world economy. And we need to get on top of it properly now before it starts seeping out and we lose the power and it gets overregulated again by these demons and monsters that seem to always manage to get their hands on the levers of power. So hopefully we can turn that down. And if you don't think it's important to rejig the economy and you're eating something that came from a store, or you traveled somewhere that was a vehicle that came from some kind of assembly line or perhaps public transit, maybe you should hear where we are right now, financially speaking. A lot of trouble. And maybe you should take a look into that, because cannabis can and will do all kinds of wonderful things to reverse this particular dark situation. And for what I mean by that, just listen to this.
There's zero chance of taxes going down.
This debt that is building up is like a cancer. It will literally destroy our country from within.
On the last two administrations, we have seen our national debt quadruple. It was $5 trillion in 2000. Just 15 years later, $20 trillion.
The situation is theoretically soluble, but not practically and realistically soluble.
Since Inauguration Day, President Obama pushing for 442 different tax increases.
Here in California, it's outrageous what we're paying.
Burger King is to invert itself as technically a Canadian company so it can pay the lower Canadian tax rates.
Burger King is a victim of the war on success.
At this point, with 50% of the American population being net recipients of benefits from the government, that's only going to go up as the economy deteriorates. I think we're headed toward a genuine crisis, and all you could hope to do is to save yourself from the consequences of all this stupidity.
That's about it. And you can only save yourself from the consequences of a few choices in your life or circumstances that took you down. And in my case, stage 4 cancer. What I did to turn myself around was to take the bull by the horns. And by that, I mean take the bullshit by the horns. I didn't believe the guy when he told me I was going to die. And you can easily say that I was just in denial. Well, I'm still in denial 3 years later, and no longer at stage 4. I'm categorizing it, thanks very much, as stage 5. So that's where we're at these days. That's why we have a lot of need. Of course, this was a several years old clip. This is a 2.5-year-old clip we just listened to. They're talking about Obama there, but the effects are still there, and it's even worse. So a lot of presidents do tax hikes. It's not just the current folk in there in the White House. So there you go. That's what's the problem, and here's what's the answer, is the cannabis availability that needs to happen properly, and it needs to happen soon, and it is happening. So let's calm down for a second. Just going to take it easy. Well, I guess I'm not going to calm down if that happens. All right, here we go. Some quick news for you before we get to our interview with Todd Scattini, the hemp colonel. Ontario landlords, Ontario being the province that surrounds Toronto, Ontario landlords want to ban cannabis from rental housing. I guess you'll have to buy a house to smoke weed. It's always favored the wealthy. I'm about to lose my house, so I wonder what I'm going to do. Ontario landlords want to ban weed from rental housing. Now, if you're listening from another place, another country, maybe another province, you might think, oh, well, that's not a big deal. Just go outside. Wrong. You can't go outside. That's what's in the legislation. Now, if you're a medical marijuana user, there are certain places you can use it outside, but you'll still be hassled. Don't get over that. You got to believe that's going to happen. But if you're living at home in an apartment, you have to smoke inside. That's just the law. They didn't take that into account. These fools that put together a series of laws that they said they spent a year on in Ontario, working really hard. We're very proud of ourselves. And there's this giant hole on day one. First thing was the cops said they wouldn't be ready. Second thing is you have to smoke it in your apartment. But you might live in a building where the landlord says you're not allowed to smoke it in your apartment. And then if you are able to do that and smoke it in there anyway, the government says they care so much about the children. And meanwhile, you'll be smoking that in your apartment where your kids live, ostensibly, which is not supposed to be happening to them, but you have to do it there because you're not allowed to do it somewhere else. This is the kind of mindset that we're supposed to aspire to, that they would like us to stop using cannabis so we can be straight-thinking, regular people and coming up with nonsense that I just described. These are these self-described sober social champions who say that cannabis has never offered anything, and they're afraid of what it'll do to your mind. But listen to that again. You have to smoke it at home, but if you live in an apartment, maybe your landlord says you're not allowed to and it'll be in the lease. But even if you can get around with that, your kids are going to be there, and that's where you have to smoke it, even though they're trying to protect the kids. These people, I waffle. I do. I go back and forth between how friggin' stupid are they and how demonic are they. And perhaps it would be fun to get a stupid demon on the show to talk to. Maybe there are stupid demons. Maybe stupidity is not exclusive of evil. Maybe that's what it is. So on Vice.com it says, William Blake says he has no issue with people smoking weed, but he doesn't want it happening in his homes. He's a landlord at a number of duplexes, multiplexes, townhouses, condominiums in and around Toronto, and said he's also one of many Ontario landlords with major concerns about how cannabis legalization will impact rental housing if tenants are allowed to grow their own plants and smoke weed legally. Maybe we should be considering why one guy can own so many different homes and tell a lot of people what to do just because he's got a fatter profit margin than those of us that don't have 15, 20 buildings to tell people how they can live their lives. Hey, William Blake? This is one of the most important issues for Ontario landlords in many, many years, Blake, who is a member of the Ontario Landlords Association, told Vice. When the federal government legalizes cannabis this summer, Canadians will be allowed to grow. Allowed! They'll be allowed to grow up to 4 plants in their homes and possess and consume weed legally, but provinces, they don't like it. Lost my feed here for a second. Come on, man. All right, the hell with that story. Oh, there it is. But provinces have the authority to set their own rules, which is really funny because they quite don't. Check out the myth, though. The myth is Canada. The myth of Canada.ca. The myth is Canada. I'll get to that later. Sorry, it's a live show. Things are skitching out on me here. Hang on. Stop that now. It's like somebody else is using the mouse on my computer. That's no fun. In Ontario, the only place it will be legal to consume weed recreationally will be in private residences, which the province defines as private self-contained living quarters in any multi-unit building or facility. Doesn't that sound homey? All public spaces, and listen to that word, public, where people are. Workplaces, cars, and boats are off limits. Medical cannabis users will be subject to the same restrictions as tobacco smokers. Apparently not, because when you're a tobacco smoker around here, you're supposed to smoke 9 meters away from any doorway of a building, and tobacco smokers are either extremely defiant or unable to count all the way up to 9. But now landlords like Blake are saying they want their properties to be off limits as well. Blake told Vice the issue of cigarette smoke is one of the most common complaints he comes across. Okay, that's different kind of smoke. He includes a non-smoking stipulation as part of his lease agreements with tenants, but said in the past he's had an issue where someone in the basement was smoking it and it became a problem for the upstairs tenants, a family with a baby. Let's also realize that if that family with that baby and that mother and father feel like smoking cannabis, they'll be legally held to smoke that cannabis right in front of that baby. In the end, he had to go through the landlord-tenant dispute process to evict his tenant, a process that took months. I wonder if he's prepared to do that with the tens of thousands of people that are going to come full force when we get more of this information into their heads. Ontario landlords can't update current leases to include a ban on smoking weed, though they can add it to new leases. Okay, now I'm just going to step in here and say one of the things about cannabis that I like to say is that although people do consume it by smoking, it really is a better idea to do it by vaping. And not to offend any cigarette paper companies, and I do partake of this from time to time, but generally speaking, given the fact that I'm a stage 4 cancer guy that pulled out of it now up to stage 5, I don't tend to do it that often. More of a social situation. When I'm regularly consuming, I will take in the vape as much as possible. and also the cannabis oil, the Rick Simpson oil, that if you're listening as a doctor or what have you that doesn't believe that stuff works, well, I've got news for you. You just have to put aside a few minutes to listen to it. A lot of other chumps in Canada having a hard time with cannabis. Vancouver on the west coast, the left coast as they call it. Mayor Jim Watson says he's not going to support cannabis lounges in Ottawa when it becomes legal. You have to smoke it at home in front of your kids. We don't want people going into a place and enjoying themselves with this stuff. This is the mayor of Vancouver, by the way. I have no idea with their fantastic 420 that they've been doing forever, how they've got a chump like this with the big chain medallion on. Ottawa Mayor Jim Watson says he won't support the creation of cannabis lounges in the city, an idea floated by the provincial government as the country heads towards legalizing recreational pot. And you better get on it, because there's no way it's not going to happen. Last week, the province said it'll consider both cannabis lounges and smoking vaping areas outside multi-unit buildings, such as apartment and condos. Imagine that. You're going to take your dog out for a crap, have a quick vape, pop upstairs. All the old ladies can still look at you scornfully. And the old men, too. This isn't a sexist issue. Just a lot of older people think it's still, they were heavily indoctrinated by the crap from the 40s, 50s, and 60s, 70s. And they're having a tough time with it, aren't they cute? Cannabis activist Lisa Campbell says both ideas make sense, although she considers it a miracle the government even suggested them. Both the federal and provincial governments have taken a conservative, cautious approach to legalizing pot, because the more you take it into your body, the more you realize the system that's preventing you from doing it is completely messed up on more levels than just cannabis restriction. And they like to set precedents, don't they? So let's zoom over to England. Got a lot of great listeners in the UK. Looks like there's a cannabis social club is going to become the first in the UK to be backed by police. So in Vancouver, they're not allowed. They don't want that. It's a terrible idea. Mayor says no. And in England, here we go with a social club. A cannabis club where people can smoke freely while watching TV or playing pool has been backed by the police in the UK. So no one is really on the level here. There's so many different angles to this. Depends on where you live. They're setting their own restrictions and allowances, and none of it is matching, and none of it makes sense, and it's super hard to keep on top of, even though I'm a fan of the news. The users at the Teesdale Cannabis Club, of which I am a member on Facebook, the first of its kind, pay an annual £35 membership to get high in peace. The Middlesbrough Club, set up by Michael Fisher 4 years ago, allows for guests to make use of the Class B drug without a fear of getting a criminal record, as it should be. The club's seen its membership balloon from 60 to 180 in the past 14 months and boasts guests including TV star Jeremy Kyle, who visited while shooting his new series, The Kyle Files. Kyle Files. Some people don't like the in front of their, get all upset. The club resides in the policing district of the Durham Constabulary, one of 5 forces in the country to have stopped actively chasing cannabis users and small-scale growers. Let's have you folks here in Canada get on that thing right now. I just got a notice from our mayor, John Tory, in Toronto today, was going on about community relations between police and the folks, and he says that it's important that we have good relations between all parts of the community with the police, all parts of the community, no exception, says the mayor, and then immediately shits on the notion of having any kind of cannabis social club here in the city. Johnny Forkton Tory. Hey, John, listen up. Here's what we need to know so far about marijuana legalization in 8 states and D.C. Number 1, marijuana arrests have plummeted. That's a good thing unless you're a shareholder in a for-profit prison. Youth marijuana use has not increased, so get off of that high horse. Stop peddling that fiction. Marijuana legalization is linked to lower rates of opioid-related harm. The end. Shut up. That's it. No more argument. And no more setting policy as though this were the opposite. Legalization has not made the roads less safe. We can take your bullshit detectors that you've all invested into the hardware companies of and send them back to their makers and take the friggin' loss. Marijuana tax revenues are exceeding initial estimates. So there's even more money for you to skim from and lie about. What are you worried about? States are allocating marijuana tax revenues for social good, and the marijuana industry is creating jobs, like I said earlier, so it does so contribute to the economy. It does so contribute to the welfare and the positivity of this society. I need some of the folks who have been constantly counseling to the opposite to sit down here and let's have a little chinwag live. While these folks, like the Hamilton police in Ontario, say it's frustrating dealing with the 46 illegal cannabis dispensaries. It's frustrating doing this thing that I don't need to do. Enacting this police state mindset. It's difficult sometimes. If I bust 10 dispensaries, I gotta do a lot of paperwork, man. Why don't you sit down and shut up then? How about that? Now here we have a bit of a situation here. We're going to get to our caller. Our guest, Todd Scattini, just in a few minutes. I've got to get this through. It's very important. I spoke of this on the show earlier. That last year, it was in the news reported that Constable Michael Thompson, who worked on the drug squads, died from a fentanyl overdose. And that happened, I believe, in April. And then they decided at the end of the year that it was indeed a fentanyl overdose, and it was indeed an amount of fentanyl that could not have been just from touching it. He must have ingested it. And it's very upsetting to lose a member of the force in such a way, this drug squad member. But as the police like to tell us, it's a dangerous, dangerous game. So this 37-year-old strapping officer who didn't make it. I said on the show the last time I mentioned this that I wasn't going to have any comment because it would do nothing but upset people, what I have to say about it. So just put that in some brackets. Let's move on to this story. It says, police chief defends marijuana raids at an unruly news conference. This is from 2016. The news conference of the cops from a couple of years ago on this stupid, oppressive, evil, dark, rights-oppressing Project Claudia. Claudia being a name that signifies lameness, so I don't know if they were just having fun at the people who use medical marijuana or why they chose that name. But these officers were hitting all kinds of unlicensed marijuana dispensaries across the city. They've been slapping criminal charges on dispensary owners and employees and confiscating more than 270 kilograms of pot. That's just 1 week, one time. These guys have been raking it in forever. So far, we have an officer who died from a fentanyl overdose. We have several other officers who have been busting dispensaries. We also have the police saying they want to flip the coin on figuring out how it's so hard to test drivers for pot. I'll tell you why. Because just because you have a certain amount of cannabis positivity in your bloodstream does not mean you are impaired. It's not the same as alcohol. You can't keep registering it and using it and monitoring it like alcohol, but as soon as it's different, you don't acknowledge the change. Alcohol is in your body when you drink, and you're not supposed to drive when you use it, and you immediately start off-gassing alcohol because it's trying to get out of your body. It's not a natural compound in your body in these concentrations that we drink. Now, it's your right to do it, and that's fine if you do. But don't drive. I get it. But it's different if you're actually consuming cannabis. It's a nutritional compound. It wants to stay in your body for a long time. So there's no need to legislate it into a position where if you're reading that you have a certain amount of cannabis in your system that you're automatically impaired. And I don't give a shit if you've invested into the company that shows those positive readings or not. And this needs to be stopped before it needs to be enacted. It's hard to test drivers for pot because the amount of cannabis you have in your body is not indicative as to whether or not you're impaired to drive. It's flawed. It doesn't work. You can't build laws around it and then enforce them and then put people in jail for breaking fantasy. That's what I mean when it was legalized. They change what they bust you for to something else. So that needs to stop. An investigation by the Fifth Estate on CBC shows that the tests done by police drug recognition experts can lead to false arrests, can and do. They're prone to police bias, and we don't need that. We've got cops dying from fentanyl. We've got cops raiding dispensaries. And what do they do with that stuff they raid? Those 270 kilograms here and there. What happens to that? It's very dangerous stuff, apparently. And I'll tell you what they do with it. Maybe not all of them, but it's happening. It's happening a lot. I'll tell you what they're doing with it. They're consuming it. These cops that are taking medicine from people and busting them and giving them a hard time are also consuming it on the job sometimes. 2 Toronto police officers have been suspended after allegedly getting high while on duty after consuming marijuana edibles stolen during a dispensary raid. Like we didn't know. Like there's only 2. It's called the tip of the iceberg. These aren't the only 2. Are you kidding me? And they're not just eating it, they're smoking it and taking it home. I used to have a joint. Once in a while. I used to have that. I don't tend to smoke that too much anymore. But when I wound up using cannabis, I wound up doing some jokes about it. And rather off-putting to some people because they'd look at you and think, is this guy going to die? But what happens was, I would say, to be able to make this oil to turn your life around, you need to locate yourself a good source of high-quality cannabis. Now, where do we score something like that? At a police evidence storage locker. But you better get there before Friday night, because 1 pound goes down to 1 ounce real quick. That was a joke. It was offensive. It was mean to the police. And now here we have 2 police doing that very same thing. They're saying it's speculation at this time, and he's not going to speculate in an ongoing investigation. So I sent them a Facebook message today, asking them how many other cops, what are the odds that there's just these 2 doing it, and just these 2 getting caught? That's from today. That's news from today. That came in, yesterday. Who cares? It's fresh as hell. Cops take the drug. Now, I'm going to have to say that if we're meant to believe that this stuff is dangerous, and we're told that it's awful, and we're told it's something we should keep away from, and we're told that fentanyl is dangerous, and now all this legislation is coming in, I move that we test police officers prior to the shift and after the shift. That's how we're going to keep them safe. That's how we're going to know that whatever they confiscate winds up being accounted for. So if you're a police officer and you're in the drug squad and you're testing other people on a say-so, we got to know you're safe too. Anybody having access to this dangerous, dangerous substance should be checked for it at any given time. So I sent them a Facebook message to that effect, and of course they haven't gotten back to me yet. What are you going to do? I'm calling for a testing of the police before and after their shifts. That's what I'm talking about. But right now, I'd like to move us into our interview with our fantastic Todd Scattini, who is standing by, and we are going to call him right now on the old Skype-a-rooney, and let's see how this goes. We had some problems last week with Dana Larson, and I'm happy to say that while we had problems with Dana Larson, I was able to contact him, and we did get Todd recorded, and that'll be a special standalone episode. Sorry, Dana was recorded. That'll be a standalone episode. But right now we're listening for Todd. Are you there, Todd?
Yeah, I am. How you doing, Alan?
I'm good. Just a little quiet. I'm going to see if I can do something about that. Here we go. All right. How's that now, Todd? You better there?
You're loud and clear.
Perfect. So are you. Welcome to the show. Thanks for coming on. It's great to, we had a wonderful chat on the weekend just to get familiar with each other. What's your day like today?
Oh, it's been a good day. Actually, I've already had about 3 phone calls, running in multiple different directions, trying to find my way into the cannabis industry and figure out what it's all about for me.
And you just left the military's employ, is that right? Like recently?
That's right. Yeah, actually, my uniform's still hanging in the closet, still warm. I left on January 1st was my retirement date after 27 years now.
27 years, and you left on January 1st. Was that in celebration of California's new laws that kicked in on the same day?
Yeah, it's actually funny. So I'm from California, born and raised in California, and the year I graduated from West Point, 1996, was the year that California took the bold step to legalize medical cannabis. And ironically, this journey in cannabis started for me about 6 years ago when I was in Afghanistan, and my last trip to California was before that. And so I just went back this Christmas to kind of show my kids California, take my wife out there. And the day I retired, at the very same moment, my home state went legal for adult use. So it was pretty symbolic, and it was really a great time.
That sounds like a good time. Listen, let's let the folks know who you are. I said you're the hemp colonel, and maybe a little confusing for folks. So let's go back in time to you're a young guy, and you need to get a job, and you wound up in the military. And tell us about that and your journey a little bit in the military, and what kind of mindset you're coming at this whole change of life with.
Sure. Well, so I was born and raised in California, raised in Bakersfield, and I went into the Army at about the early age of 19. I had failed out of community college, wrecked my car. I really had nowhere else to go. And I joined the Army, and I tell you, I loved it from the very first moment. I immediately found some kindred spirits and enjoyed what I was doing and enjoyed the challenge and the camaraderie. And I thought, man, I'll quit doing this when I stop having fun. And so I still haven't stopped having fun with it. It's just my new focus in life is really something that I was unable to do in the military. So I was enlisted. I went to West Point. I graduated, became an armor officer, meaning rolling on tanks and Bradleys and doing some heavy lifting in the combat arms. And then I transitioned into a foreign area officer, which is a certain type of officer that the Army develops to focus on particular regions of the world. I was lucky enough to have Europe because by this point I spoke 3 European languages, and then they taught me 2 more.
Give us a little German right now. Say something in German.
Oh ja, aber das ist kein Problem. Ich habe vielmal in Deutschland gewohnt.
Okay, so you're multilingual. That's handy as hell, and you're in Europe. So that sounds like a good gig so far. You can talk to everybody.
Yeah, and it really makes our true passion of traveling quite easy if we speak those languages. But bottom line, I was sent there to Europe to help be a senior advisor for ambassadors and general officers. I served in Germany. I was an armor officer in a cavalry squadron, and then I was in the Czech Republic, where I went to their equivalent of a command and general staff college or a battalion commander's course, all in Czech. Then I was an exchange officer to the Belgian Army for 2 years. I was an army attaché in Bosnia and Herzegovina, so I speak Serbo-Croatian as well. Then I was a liaison officer to the French Army. And one of my favorite jobs of all time, I was the defense attaché to Slovenia. And then I left after serving as a command and general staff college instructor in Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, where we train our kind of mid-level officers to move forward and become field grade officers and general officers.
A field grade officer.
Right. So that's major, lieutenant colonel, and colonel.
Wow, that's incredible. So you're about as into the system as it gets. I mean, you're part of a major part of the military for 3 decades. Yeah. This is a system guy, and a lot of people would have the perception that if you're doing things properly and you're minding your P's and Q's, you've got nothing at all to do with cannabis. Drinking maybe, but not cannabis. So when did cannabis start to come into your intellectual purview?
Yeah. So one position that I didn't speak about too much was when I was serving in Paris. I was asked to come to Afghanistan to be a senior advisor for the ISAF commander. ISAF is the International Security and Assistance Force. It's the largest military coalition that has ever existed, with 51 nations, Canada being one of them. And I had a great time with working with the Canadian Army, by the way. While serving for the senior general who was running the show, he asked us to kind of come up with ways to engage with the Afghans and create an industry for them out of resources that they had. Right. And so I took that as quite a challenge, because I knew they only had heroin, minerals, which were all owned by the Chinese because they have very rare mineral stores there. And then they had cannabis, which they cultivated for hashish, and then they would export to prohibition markets so that they could get high prices for them, and that money would come back in the form of IEDs that was killing our soldiers. And I thought, well, why don't we just transition them to a hemp industry with 25,000 different uses and 8,000 years of history? Our species have almost evolved with the plant. And we could create something for them where they have a product that provides food, fuel, fiber, medicine, a true industry. And it would grow very, very well there. I know it does already in small patches, but it would grow very well with there because it has very little need for water or pesticides or anything like that. And the bonus kicker, what I thought about, was that by growing hemp in the proximity of cannabis, it would weaken the cannabis crop, and they would get less money for the hashish downrange.
Wow.
Yeah, so I thought it was genius, but I was kind of laughed out of the room, and but I didn't mind getting shut down. I wasn't married to the idea just yet,
right?
But it really did kind of inspire me to do some deeper study into the plant, and I learned about the roots of our own prohibition in the United States, being based on racism and economic greed and things of that nature, and also against the wishes of the American Medical Association and the Nurses Association.
Is that right? At the beginning, it was against the Medical Association? I thought they were happy to get rid of it.
Absolutely.
Oh,
absolutely
my
not.
mistake. Tell us
a wonderful Mr. Harry J. Anslinger found one medical professional who was willing to stand up and say, yes, this is the devil's weed, and it's a really big problem. But it's so interesting. I just found the subject so interesting.
Well, stick around for the end of the show. We're going to be going into for conspiracy queries. I'm doing a little reading from Harry Anslinger, and it's very, very entertaining because it's written in earnest. It's written in earnest in 1947, but it's hilarious. So we close out these shows lately with that. So that's Harry for you. So, okay, so now you're at this place where you're in the middle of transitioning from within the structure, from within the military itself. Hello?
Yes.
Is
absolutely.
that a confusing question? I'm sorry.
It was. That's where I was. So really I started studying the plant in earnest about 6 years ago, and I immediately went to determine whether or not there would be military applications to the plant or constituents of the plant, and obviously I found many. But the one thing that really got to me was when I found U.S. patent 6630507, and I found out that...
Let me write that down. Give me that again.
Oh, yeah, that's U.S. patent 6630507. That's easily Googleable.
Yeah.
But, it was when I saw that the Department of Health and Human Services, on behalf of our Food and Drug Administration, has a patent on cannabinoids, in particular cannabidiol, as a neuroprotectant, anti-inflammatory, and an antioxidant. And at this point, I knew a little bit about traumatic brain injury, which had a personal effect on me because I lost an amazing young officer named Captain Andy Houghton, who was a platoon leader for me in Germany. And after I left command, the unit deployed to Iraq, and he sustained a traumatic brain injury, and about a month later passed away. And it was all because we did not provide any sort of neuroprotection for a soldier, but also we were unable to control the swelling or the expression of a bunch of dangerous chemicals that the brain emits once you have a traumatic brain injury. So we came up with this strategy to mitigate and treat traumatic brain injury called the Athena Protocol. So Andy was a West Point grad like myself. Athena's helmet is on the West Point crest, and she's the Greek goddess of good counsel, of knowledge, and of military victory. And so I thought it was fitting to call it the Athena Protocol, because it's really a protocol to replace one that does not exist today. The purpose of the protocol is really to provide a neuroprotectant prior to going into combat or even on patrol, and then have a follow-up, a phase 2 of the protocol, where we're able to administer non-psychoactive cannabinoids in a couple of different methods to a soldier.
Okay, before we get to that phase 2, injecting those, let's
Sure.
just take a second here to break down. I sort of know what you mean, but I do ask questions. A neuroprotectant, this is neurology as the brain, so you're somehow protecting the brain. Are we talking about the myelin sheath or what kind of thing? Can you just explain specifically what's going on here?
Absolutely. So we're talking about providing neuroprotection for the neuron, the entire neuron, as well as having the gray matter around the neurons as strong as possible.
Okay, and that gets damaged, obviously, when it gets banged around, like with CTE or what have you.
Correct, yeah, and has a direct application to this chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or CTE, that our NFL players are getting. And I really want to exploit that. I really want to explore that, because I feel like our veterans and our soldiers certainly deserve that.
So you had some kind of indication that was effective, and then you moved into phase 2.
Right. And so phase 2 of the Athena Protocol is essentially being able to administer these non-psychoactive cannabinoids to reduce the inflammation and prevent the expression of dangerous chemicals that actually eat away at the neurons and the star sites and the gray matter around those neurons.
Wow, it's incredible, isn't it?
And I think that we can do that. Yeah,
It's amazing.
I think it's an ideal substance for it, since we know it passes the blood-brain barrier very, very rapidly. And if we can have this on the battlefield available for victims of traumatic brain injury, we might be able to save some lives.
So the sooner you get it in there, the better the chance is that the brain itself will not emit these other bizarre chemicals that take us down later. Is that what happens?
That's exactly what we're trying to do. Yeah.
What are these chemicals that are so terrible that we also create in ourselves that if not treated will be thoroughly developed?
Yeah. So what the brain emits are proteins, cytokines, and glutamate. And I'm not a scientist, but I read a lot, and I'm surrounded by a lot of scientists that I think are really amazing people. And so essentially these chemicals kind of fight it out in your brain, and they destroy the gray matter and eventually attack the neurons and the star sites, and it becomes near irreversible.
That's frightening that we actually create that within ourselves.
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to get a laugh out of it, but here we are. Where it's like, oh, you've been hit in the head. Oh, okay. Let's start up automatic shutdown, and it's like a computer that has a countdown to destroy itself or something. It's very bizarre.
Yeah, absolutely.
So this is all going on while you're in the military.
Right. So, and I'll tell you how that happened. When I came back from Afghanistan, I really dug into the books. I dug into the podcasts. I listened to everything I could about cannabis. I read everything I could, scientific and otherwise. And I was trying to figure out, as I watched the American policies evolve state by state, and I was also watching from Europe, European policies involved, especially in terms of medical cannabis. And I was trying to figure out how the skill sets that I had developed by serving as a military diplomat might be able to impact the industry. And so I basically took what I did in the military as a foreign area officer, which was essentially forward U.S. foreign and defense policy between the United States and other European countries. So I thought that I would apply that directly to the cannabis industry and help forward objectives of the cannabis industry and kind of help build a bridge between North America and Europe in that manner.
Wow.
And so the concept that I came up to do it with was by developing Harvest 360 so that we can take specific cannabinoid formulations that are being developed all throughout the United States and in Canada, to protect them, to patent them through intellectual patent policies, and to license them for use throughout Europe. Because unlike Canada, the United States, we cannot deliver the plant matter to Europe.
And why is that?
Well, because for us, it's still a Schedule I drug under the Controlled Substances Act.
And why is that?
Well, how much time do we have here?
We have time. We have time. Yeah, well, why is that? Tell us. I mean, on the one hand, you've got a government saying, no, this stuff's terrible, can't have it. And then on the other hand, an aspect of the government, yourself in the military, is over there hitting these roadblocks.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's incredibly frustrating. So the Controlled Substances Act took place in 1970, and Schedule I means that they put substances on there that are, they state that they have no medical potential, no medical value, and a huge potential for abuse.
Right.
And cannabis is right on top of that, up there with PCP and heroin and a number of different things, even though drugs such as cocaine are on Schedule II, even lower.
That's incredible. I do have a thought on that I would like to bring forth for the folks. So just hopefully you'll hear this. But if you can't, Todd, we'll be right back. I just want to take a minute here. And once again, at the beginning of the show, we had Terence McKenna, and here's a little thought from Terence on this very exact topic right here. Hang on a second.
And what that means then is that people who can cut through these many, many illusions, the illusion of materialism, the illusion of business as usual, the illusion of benevolent institutions carefully guiding us toward reasonable destinies. If you cut through all that, if you disabuse yourself of all that, you will empower yourself to eventually be able to stand up in delicate social and political situations and just say, bullshit.
Yeah, so that's Terence once again cutting through. I think this is one of the things I've learned from listening to Terence and other researchers is that there's a spider web of laws or regulations. It's like a mechanical device itself. If you're like, well, it's legal here in this state, but not in this state, and you start to build these verbal constructs that are then enshrined in paperwork and sworn into law by people, and it's all different everywhere, all over the place, and you're trapped in a system at that time where on the one hand you're advancing this thing with your 5 languages and you're moving it into workable situations, trying to help people, and then at home it's illegal and it's a Schedule I substance and it's got no medical value and it's terrible and the people that use it are bad. So this is the craziness that we've been trying to get out of for the last 80 years. So I'm very glad we have people such as yourself with your background coming forward with your kind of research. So thanks for doing that.
Well, thank you. I mean, for me, what I see this as is, I'm using the tools that the military has given me, and those languages, that's great. That's kind of a great party trick, and I understand the culture and the history of Europe. But for me, the most important thing that I learned both at West Point and while serving in the military was to be a critical thinker, to really challenge the status quo and question absolutes whenever possible, because I think from that we can, if we're creatively thinking as well, we can come up with really great solutions to some super complex issues. And for me, I can't think of a more complex issue than traumatic brain injury or post-traumatic stress or chronic pain. I mean, I think there are so many issues that this particular subject lends itself to, and I mean those go as far as disparities in social justice, and the prison population that we have in the United States, all the way to international markets and international relations. I mean, if you just look today, I mean, for a great example, if you look down to Colombia, where cannabis cultivation for legal use is just blossoming. You know, I mean, this is a country who 2 decades ago was only known for cocaine or, drug cartels, but now we have legal cannabis cultivation taking place there.
Well, that's strange because as far as I knew, in Colombia, there's an American program going on there forever called Plan Colombia, which was supposedly all about the removal of the vegetation that provides coca leaves and cannabis and what have you. So this would be like, to me, I would say they didn't get any of that done. It's been living throughout those attempts at eradication, and now it's burgeoning and blossoming anyway. You know, so once again, we spent a lot of time and effort repressing what's only natural at this point.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's really interesting. I think about, even though I don't know so much about South America, I do know a lot about security cooperation and the way we spend money from the United States government to help build out partners and allies and equip them and train them to do certain missions. And I've been thinking a lot about the drug war, and I do see it as an abject failure, as the majority of people do. I think only 7% of Americans believe that the drug war is actually working. So clearly, we're doing something wrong.
I think you'd think it's working if you're in a position to profit from it, and those folks have had a lot of power. I said it earlier about for-profit prisons. I mean,
exactly.
They want to keep people, the prison guards, unions, etc., here and there. They lobby against legalization of cannabis because, technically speaking, you'd have far fewer prisoners, and then therefore far fewer jobs, and then far fewer payments into the old union for the corrections officers. I mean, you're right. This is about greed at so many levels. We somehow have to get past that.
Yeah, absolutely. We certainly have to get past it, and part of it is education. I mean, a huge part of it is education and breaking down stigmas that, as you know, have been built up over 80 years. But I think we're at a tipping point. I really do. When, especially in the United States, if I'm looking at it from that perspective, we see something like 65% of Americans support legalization of cannabis, full legalization, and that really it spans all political leanings, left or right. And then over 90% of Americans believe that we should have access to medical cannabis because people are seeing the efficacy. It seems like you can't swing a dead cat today and not hit someone whose life has somehow been positively impacted by medical cannabis.
Yeah. Tipping point. You're right. I hope so. Yeah, we have to keep pushing, though. I don't think we can say, oh, there's a tipping point and relax. This is where we really have to.
Oh, absolutely.
So on that note, you spoke earlier about you're trying to become a part of something. I mean, you're building some kind of justice league with your military background. You're trying to find people in key points around the world to put an informational lattice work together that can outstrip and outstrengthen the former stack of lies and laws here and there and everywhere that's been preventing this kind of stuff. So you're a major player in that, or a colonel player in that. How do you see yourself locating these other people? I mean, through cannabis. We should talk some more about Harvest 360 as well, and exactly what that organization does, and how you're pulling these people together. This is important information, life-saving, potentially, and life-improving almost always. So how do you do that?
So when I started studying this, I knew that I was really interested in joining the industry and figuring out how I was going to do that. So I've really had a great opportunity of about 2 years or so, maybe even longer, to develop my network of people. And as you see from my picture, I'm a bald guy. So sometimes I feel like who's the bald guy on the X-Men? You know, the guy in the wheelchair?
Oh, yeah, that's Patrick Stewart, Xavier.
Yeah. Xavier, yeah.
That's you,
I feel a little bit like him because I swear, I mean, I have no superpowers. I have zero, but I surround myself by people who do.
Right.
Amazing people within the industry who are transitioning from even other industries to join. And so I'm really proud of that. And so many of them are from Canada as well.
Oh, that's great.
So I've been developing this network for a heck of a long time, and that's kind of how the hemp kernel started, by the way, because when I first started delving into this, I knew that there was major social media activity taking place, and there was a lot of educating and discussion. And so I had to think of some secret moniker to communicate online with. And so I came up with the hemp kernel, and it probably sounds kind of lame. And I also recognized that, the hemp plant doesn't have any kernels. It's got seeds, but and I thought that it made up THC was kind of cute as well.
No, it's a good name. We do have a lot of listeners from Green Veterans as well, so I sure hope those folks are enjoying the show today as much as I am. I'm sure they are.
Oh, good. Shout out to the guys. They're always on my mind. And, it's funny. We talk a lot about post-traumatic stress and traumatic brain injury. I mean, DARPA in the United States, this is our Advanced Research Projects Administration, they call traumatic brain injury the signature wound of the Iraq and Afghanistan war.
Wow.
Yet we really have no treatment for it. We haven't made many advances on it. And we certainly don't have any sort of preventative in mind, even though we have this patent for neuroprotection. But I think also post-traumatic stress is something that is amazingly dangerous for veterans, and something that's very common for a veteran to come back with, and it often results in suicide in the United States.
Yeah.
We have about 22 a day, and that's really a lowball number. Because
22 military suicides a day in America. That's what you're saying?
Yes.
Wow.
Absolutely. We have 22 a day, and that comes from a 2014 study from the VA. But the funny thing about it, well, not funny, but the ironic thing about it is that that study didn't include the largest states with veterans populations for some reason. It also didn't include it didn't count all suicides. Right. Bottom line.
So you're talking lowball number. We could be talking 25, 30, maybe a little more every day.
Yeah.
So this is from if I might step in here and say, this is obviously a lot of times from head injury itself, or some kind of horrible thing that's happened to you, and you can't mentally get past this terrible thing that you saw, this terrible thing that you might have had something to do with, you might have been involved. You can't shake it out of your mind, and cannabis can help you process that and deal with it, particularly with the right guidance, and to putting those pieces to bed so that you don't have to wind up killing yourself, and sometimes your wife and kids along with it, right? I mean, I don't know what the stats are on that, but that also does happen. And to say to people, to say to a population, look, we've got this war going on, and we're going to have to send these folks over there to do something about it. And then most of the people don't want the war to happen, but it does anyway. And then it's support the troops, support the vets, and all. You're anti-American if you don't get behind this effort. That only goes so far when they don't have the proper equipment to go do the job, and they don't have anything in the way. They don't have what could be there for them to help them once they return home. They just, it's like a used Kleenex or something. Each serviceman is a used Kleenex, and they'll tell you at the beginning, you got to support the troops, and it's really important to get on board. This is all the sell job for the military exercise or incursion. And then when they come home, it's like, screw them. We've had trouble with this in Canada with our federal minister, Julian Fantino. At the time, he was a conservative minister, and he was giving the veterans a hard time with all of this. And now he's a profiteer at Aleafia Cannabis Company, this former police officer. So doesn't seem to be a little harmony in the direction with a lot of these people that have made it terrible on the one hand and are now profiting from it on the other. So, but I'm interested in finding out how you have experienced this. Are you free to talk about any personal experimentation with any of this particular substance, or are we going to keep this professional only? It's a conversation.
Well, I mean, I will go as far to say that yes, I am experienced. I understand the effects of cannabis, but I don't really talk too much about my own medical regime or the history of that medical regime. But I am certainly experienced, and especially since I'm calling you from a state where if a person has an ounce of cannabis, that's a year in prison and a $5,000 fine. So. Yeah. It's just something. It's something that I really like to have a conversation about with pretty much everyone I've met. And I've made it a point, actually, as I was departing the military for the last 2 years while serving in Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, in the school. Every general officer I would see, every senior leader I would see, at some point we would speak about cannabis, and I would talk about the medical applications of military applications of cannabis.
Right.
And honestly, I was never shut down. I was never shut down at all. The first recommendation when I made it in Afghanistan, I was kind of eschewed a bit or pushed to the side a bit.
Yeah.
But now that I can speak about it from a position of education and understanding, and I've read the studies, and I know the public policy and the health impacts of cannabis, I rarely get shut down. And I've spoken to some very senior officers who are always confounded by the fact that we have a patent on cannabinoids as a neuroprotectant, and that they might increase the survivability of soldiers in combat. And they believe that we should be able to study it, as do, I would say, the majority of the military. There was a recent study that showed 85% of military personnel believe that we should have access to medical cannabis.
Yeah, I think the jury's in on that now, right? I mean, we've had so much positivity in the way of medical results. It's criminal to say, oh, it's only anecdotal, leave it alone. There's so many hundreds of thousands of anecdotes, all so similar from people that, haven't spent any time together. So it's time to really peel this thing open.
I fully agree. I mean, what I have come to know after all of this study and all of this reading and actually watching it take place in front of me is I am convinced that there are miracles hidden inside this plant. And I am absolutely committed to somehow unleashing those miracles and giving them back to the world. Because, for me, when I look at history, I feel like it is the United States who initially made cannabis prohibited on a global scale. And that was really in 1961, I suppose, at the UN Single Convention on Narcotic Drugs, while Harry J. Anslinger was still serving, oddly, over 30 years, that guy.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm going to be there. I don't think that I can be the guy to release those miracles, but I can certainly bring the band together.
Well, what kind of things are you talking about? Like, give us one miracle. Yeah. I mean, obviously, I know mine. I'll put mine on the table right now. But what other kinds of things have you been, thinking about in this level?
Yeah. Well, I mean, for me, the one thing that really inspired me, and one reason that I'm happy to be working with CW Hemp, the folks who've made Charlotte's Web. And by the way, I'm not on here as a walking commercial or anything. But I work with people that I really believe in, companies that I really believe in.
Sure.
When I first began studying this, and I watched the video of Charlotte Figi, who is the namesake of Charlotte's Web, being saved by cannabis, it truly inspired me. And it's inspired me so much because Charlotte Figi and her little twin sister, who also has, I believe, some epilepsy coming on, or has had some instances of epilepsy, they're both military brats. Right. And I've got two military brats of my own. These are kids who follow their dad around the world and as he serves the nation. And so when I watched Charlotte Figi on video going from 300 seizures a week to maybe a seizure a month using a non-psychoactive form of cannabis, that to me was a miracle. And I'm sure if you ask Paige Figi, Charlotte's mom, she would say that cannabis saved her child's life. And, now Charlotte is, I think, 8 or 9 years old.
Yeah.
And she's, going to school, dancing, talking, laughing, saying, I love you to her parents. And that's an amazing gift. And it's a miracle in my view. And that's just the beginning. We're really at the tip of the iceberg.
So if you're just joining us now, we're talking with Todd Scattini. He's the hemp colonel. Go back to the beginning. Listen to this again, and this is a staggering number that we just heard from Todd. This is a terrible disease affecting a little child who is for sure going to die because, you might have sneezed or something once in your life, or you might have vomited, you might have felt the spastic convulsion of a seizure. These seizures are far worse than this, and in such a little person, too many of those are obviously going to kill them. And so to go from 12 or I've heard even 1,300 seizures a month, think of that number just on its own. Even if you did anything 1,300 times, never mind have a debilitating seizure that shuts you down and just completely messes you up 1,300 times a month. Now you're doing it once a month, which sucks. But there's those other 1,299 that aren't going to be there. And this has all been scientifically shown to be coming as a result of using this plant as a tool and using it correctly. So if you're just new to this topic, just think of that. 1,300 seizures, 1,200 seizures a month down to one. So that's amazing. And it cannot be stood in front of anymore, I don't believe.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's really just one of the miracles, obviously. But I think that there are a lot more that are hidden inside the plant. We're prepared to unpack them. And you asked a little bit about how we plan on doing that.
Yes.
So Harvest 360, I actually live in Kansas City, Missouri currently.
Well, don't tell me your problems.
No. Oh, come on. The motto here is Kansas City. It's not that bad. No, it's actually a fantastic place that I've been drawn to a couple of times now. But the backside of my team is based in Denver, Colorado. And I will be moving from here with my family to Europe this coming summer. The idea is to move to Prague, Czech Republic, where I would be working with the International Cannabis and Cannabinoids Institute, as well as the National Institutes of Mental Health and the Ministry of Health in the Czech Republic, and hopefully with the Czech government at the highest levels, to basically develop a facility where we can conduct clinical trials on cannabinoid therapies. The infrastructure is already there, and the National Institutes for Mental Health is already conducting clinical trials on all sorts of psychoactive materials, to include psilocybin, LSD, and cannabis.
Right.
And it is filled with simply world-renowned doctors. And now Dr. Ethan Russo is their chief for research and development. He was recently the chief medical advisor to GW Pharmaceuticals, so he has a certain amount of familiarity with getting even prescription drugs through phase 2 clinical trials if they're based on cannabis. Wow. And I think there's a lot of potential there. What we seek to do is conduct clinical trials there based on formulations that have been created in the United States and around the world, in Canada, obviously, and get results out and tell people about and prove the efficacy of the plant. What I would seek to do, I'm actually playing around with trying to do some crowdfunding for the study, because the plant was ripped from the people's hands, and I think the people deserve to understand what the potential of the plant is. And through crowdfunding, I would love to actually conduct these studies and then just give it all away, give the information back to the people. And I think that's really the righteous thing to do. And I think that's the only way to do this, if you base it not on profit, but on compassion and the potential that the plant has.
Right. Well, we just had our head police chief, well, he used to be a police chief, Bill Blair, who's now shepherding in this restrictive cannabis system. They just announced last week that there would be 14 marijuana research projects across Canada, and none of them are what you're talking about. All of them are based on, the dangers of it and how it's going to affect indigenous communities, and there's really not a lot of positivity there coming from them, and they're saying it's a dangerous substance, so as long as we spend a lot of time on harm reduction, everything will be great. And I think that harm reduction is not the way to go per se. You go for the understanding of it, you go for the use of it as a tool. You find out what you're finding out, Colonel, and you're discovering these facts that you then base policy on, not more restriction, which is where this new several $100 million has gone into. up here. So we're a little bit more backwards than a lot of people think or realize. But so my hat's off to you for doing what you're doing. That's for sure.
Thanks very much.
You're welcome. And now, when your kids go with you over to Prague, so they're going to have to learn Czech, I guess, huh?
Well, we would seek to put them into an international school. There's some really good international schools that also have a line of study for Czech as well. We're moving to Europe to stay in Europe. We've spent so much time there as a family that it really became a part of us, and we seek to go back there. So I would want my children to integrate at some level, but I still want them to have a traditional education. But yeah, those are all things that we're trying to consider, and we're looking at the costs associated with it. And like I said, I don't necessarily want to be a hugely profit-based focus or anything. Even though I don't think that there's any shame involved in making money off of the cannabis industry. I think it's important. I would love to talk a little bit about the industry as well.
Yeah, let's do that. Before we get to the industry, I just wanted to ask you. You're a dad. Okay,
yeah.
Let's put all of this. Put all of this job and focus and everything else aside, and just say you're a dad. How old is your oldest?
I have a 14-year-old, and I have a 7-year-old. Yeah,
Oh.
so the one picture that you saw of me on that Leafly article is my whole family. That's my wife Robin and 2 sons,
Okay,
14 and 7.
So as a dad, before we get to the what you wanted to talk about with the medical stuff,
Yeah.
before you're a father, and we have to impart this knowledge to our children. It's not the same old thing where we pretend it doesn't exist, and then we ridicule them if they get in trouble or make fun of their friends for smoking a joint behind the high school building. But I'm trying to take it from you with your experience. Whether or not the military informed your parenting skills or what have you, how would you go about sitting down your child, who obviously does not partake of cannabis, and explain to this kid how it works, why it's perceived badly and has been problematic here and there, and where we're going to? Like, how do you bring that to a child, 13, 14? That's a perfect age to kind of bring it on to them. So what would you say to your child in that situation? How are you educating them?
Yeah, so I do this all the time, and I get that question quite a bit, actually. These are the things that I wanted to do when I came out of the military. I wanted to be surrounded by people that brought out the best in me. I wanted to create something that I would be very, very proud of, and I wanted to build something meaningful, and I think that's what I'm doing here, even though I still haven't figured out my title yet of what I'm doing and what I am in this industry.
Mm-hmm.
But to go back to my children, I think my 14-year-old probably knows more about cannabis policy, understanding from a scientific perspective as well as a policy perspective, and he understands kind of the devastating results that prohibition has had on our communities. But he also knows that cannabis is not for him until he's an adult and it's legal to use for him. But what I'm trying to create is a world in which you will not be put into a cage for using a plant that has never killed a single soul, and that is definitely a safer alternative to alcohol and to cigarettes and to sugar and to aspirin, for that matter.
Right.
So what I try to do is educate in the sense that he understands what the plant is capable of, both good and bad, and the dangers that are involved, especially for developing mind. But bottom line is, I would want to create something that my son would be proud to be a part of one day as an adult.
Right.
So that's it.
That's it. Okay. And then you'll have to sit him down with movies like Pineapple Express and tell him how that's not really the way it is. And
I'm in that movie.
Are you
I'm
really?
in that movie. Absolutely. Actually, I'm not. Actually, it's Bill Hader, and you may remember the very first scene of Pineapple Express. If you haven't seen it, please go back and rewatch it so you'll understand that I'm Private Miller.
Are you really? Okay, that's funny.
Yeah, and if you YouTube opening scene Pineapple Express, Private Miller is this average across the board soldier This is in the 1940s, and it's in like some underground bunker, I think, in Kansas. And they're showing the experiment that they're using item 9 on this soldier, and item 9 is marijuana cigarette. And anyway, he has a great time during the test and all of this stuff. And in the end, he says, we should be telling everyone about this. We've got to shout this from the rooftops. It's the bee's knees. And the colonel who's running the thing looks at him, and then Bill Mader looks at him and he says, F you, you know.
Let's see what happens here. Let's take a look at this. Hang on.
The colonel shuts it down. So, yeah, take a look at it. I think it's super funny.
When did it start?
But you'll see why I'm Private Miller now.
Here we are. A couple of guys walking underneath.
Okay, Private Miller, you've been smoking item 9 for 7 minutes and 13 seconds. We're going to ask you several questions. How do you feel?
Well, sir, I feel like a slice of butter melting on top of a big old pile of flapjacks. Yeah.
Okay, Private Miller.
We'll have to get to that later. I don't know where the salient bits are, but that's you, huh?
Yeah. So I've often felt like that anyway.
Yeah, that's pretty funny. Well, that's good. You can sit down with your kids and you know, you can really explain to them, okay, this is why this is funny, and this is, you know, you understand a lot of these films coming from the repression and the illegality of it from years, but this is going to change society back a different way now, and I think this is what a lot of people are upset about. They like it locked down. They like it, you know, over there in the corner, and let's put them in jail, and it's going to change and inform a lot of attitudes, and I think the more people that know how to use it, the less likely they are going to get in trouble for misusing it, and they know what it's for. I mean, my children know what it's for, and they know how it works. And I think a lot of the abuse and misuse comes from just pretending it doesn't exist, telling everybody it's bad, and then, you know, enforcing laws, and then that's why everybody wants to experiment and you know, increase the harm of
yeah, absolutely. That's
use.
why I think we need to have people who are able to speak about it openly and to give really good advice. I want to backtrack just a little bit and talk about the treatment of veterans and even medical treatment within the military. In my view, this is not the fault of the Veterans Administration or military medical professionals, because, you know, they've got to work with the toolbox that they've been given. So their toolbox is called a formulary. And the formulary is essentially the list of drugs and treatments and different possibilities that they have for treating a particular issue. And so that means, you know, if you come in for a cold, you get Mucinex. If you come in with a fever, you're going to get Tylenol. And if you come in with post-traumatic stress, there's a potential that you'll be prescribed things like selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, or if you have chronic pain, that you may be on opioids.
Yeah.
And never within that formulary have they seen anything like cannabis. And they're so confused about it because typically our doctors are educated at medical schools, which are typically paid for by the pharmaceutical industry. So they're really familiar with like this single molecule therapy of particular ailments, but it's not the doctor's faults. So I want to make sure that's
okay.
clear.
Yeah.
But I think it's important that we develop a process to educate them. I mean, for the first time ever, the Veterans Administration has provided the freedom to their doctors to speak with veterans about medical cannabis usage, if it's legal in the state where they reside. But the problem is, I don't think that they are, because typically they're not very educated about the plant. And so I think that's going to be a really difficult thing to overcome and to re-educate some folks on how to actually use it. But in time, it will come. In time, it's going to be legal in the United States and Canada, federally across the board. I guarantee it.
Yeah, it should be, because if I'm coming home from Europe after a deployment and I'm messed up in the head and I live in Colorado, I'm okay. But if I'm coming back to Indiana or wherever these other, Wisconsin, some other states that are extremely against it, then it's not fair that I wouldn't be able to access the same thing under the Stars and Stripes. Makes no sense to me.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So tell us a bit about...
Because we glorify alcohol. I'm sorry to cut you off.
No, that's okay. You're right. That's a good point.
Alcohol. You know, we kind of glorify it, and I'm not here to demonize alcohol, because I love a great beer. I love a good glass of wine.
Sure.
And I recognize the pleasure and kind of the culture around our alcohol. But, you know, when we have on every single military post a facility where we can buy cut rate alcohol all the way up to Everclear in any amount that we want, that ends up being oftentimes the drug of choice for our young military personnel. And when you combine that with pain medication or anti-anxiety medication,
exactly.
Then you have disastrous results. So I think providing a safer alternative for military personnel and certainly for veterans is an important step forward, a major advance.
All right. So when you go to Europe and you move there, you're with Harvest 360 now, because you're now officially out of the military and you're going to be doing this deployment with this company. So tell us a bit about Harvest 360, and then we're going to have to get going here.
Sure. So Harvest 360, we're essentially kind of a consulting organization, but really with the main focus is helping North American companies break into the European market that's developing by creating some strategic partnerships, by developing a line through which to export into the European market, and making connections with people that I've met over the last 6 years within my network. You know, I have cannabis and hemp contacts throughout all over the continent, as well as in the United States. I'm very closely associated with those who are doing some really advanced studies on the plant and developing some amazing things on both sides of the pond, actually. We work with companies that I believe are going to be are making revolutions in the way we cultivate cannabis, and I really try to only focus on companies with whom I share the same values and that have the same vision and goals for cannabis in the future and for the cannabis industry. And I work with companies that want to be a contributing and responsible part of the cannabis industry. One example, I suppose, is a company that I've been working with that is right here out of Kansas City. It's called Gropedo, and it's essentially a new type of grow media, which is a stone wool that has some foam cubes in it that actually provide a space for microbials to grow, like the good bacteria to grow and cultivate plants.
Right.
And it ends up helping save water. About 80% of the water that we use in cannabis cultivation is wasted. Well, and with this product, it's not. So this is essentially a new system, and I think it's going to revolutionize the way we cultivate plants in general, especially as we move more and more towards indoor cultivation, because this product is reusable, and it'll save some labor and certainly some water and nutrients. So that equals money. Right. But I believe it's a really interesting product that we're excited about.
Well, I'm happy to know that a lot of people are paying attention and listening to the show, and I'd like to suggest that you now tell us where it is we can get a hold of you, Todd, because we're going to lose you. You're going to go move to Europe soon, and hopefully you'll come on the show at that time. So where can folks get a hold of you and get more information, and more importantly, offer you more information and perhaps even funding to get this thing moving?
Yeah. Oh, that'd be wonderful. We're always looking for strategic partners around the globe, and you can find us at harvest360.co, and you can also find me on LinkedIn.
LinkedIn, okay, and that's Todd Scattini, TODD SCATTINI, the hemp colonel. Todd, it's been great speaking with you, and you will come back, right?
I will absolutely come back. I didn't get through half of my list, I think.
Oh, I know. We could talk for 10 hours. That's the thing about it. I had no idea this topic was going to be as rich as it is. I'm so glad. But
yeah,
we have to move on to another segment, and I'm so happy that we were able to hook up and we got past our Skype problems, unlike last week. So thanks very much for joining us.
Absolutely. Thanks to you, and thanks very much to Sean Dillon and those guys over at Cannabis Daily. I think they've got a great organization, and we're working closely with them to get messages out.
and you're doing a great job. Thanks very much, Todd. We'll talk to you soon.
Cheers. All the best. Bye-bye.
That's Todd Scattini. And what a great guy. What a great background he has there to be able to offer. And as exciting as it is to learn that people are doing these kinds of things. I mean, I'm just a comedian sitting behind a microphone that was felled by a fatal disease and decided not to buy the official line and to come back and talk about it. But Todd has an accredited background. If you look him up, he's quite more impressive than he lets on in the interview. So he just sounds like a regular guy, and he is, but he does have the cred, he does have the research and the background, and I'm so happy he could join us today. And hopefully we'll get a good connection with him, and I guess it's Prague he's going to go to. I would think that's most likely the case. We'll have him back at some point. But right now, what we need to do is acknowledge another fine, fantastic helper of the show, and it's been helping us keep together. Truth Seeker app. All right, this is an app you want to download on your phone. You can get Green Crush Conspiracy Queries with Alan Park, or just Green Crush, or just Conspiracy Queries. It's for discerning news junkies and conspiracy researchers that don't buy the line fed by the mainstream networks, mainstream media. It's a fantastic app. It has a lot of alternative media shows on there. You'll get this show on there, several other shows, Spaced Out Radio, UK Column News, Ground Zero with Clyde Lewis, Stuff They Don't Want You to Know, Radio Mysterioso. I had a good time listening to some of that a few days ago. It also picks up news feeds from The Intercept, the Glenn Greenwald effort, which is doing fantastically well. If you're looking for truth, Max Kaiser is on there. Russell Brand's The Trues is on there. It hasn't got any political agenda. It's going to swing back and forth. But it's just one app, and that's all you need to listen to all of these fantastic shows. So check out the Truth Seeker app. Let's go back to Terence McKenna here.
I mean, see, we think, or some of us think, that if we could just convince them that these things are important and good, that they would reschedule them. That's preposterous. They know what they are. They're perfectly aware of what it is. These scheduling laws are not there to keep you from jumping out of third-story windows. The whole thing is a little more complicated than that. Drugs are an incredible source of money for clandestine and covert intelligence operations. They are, in fact, the last major source of money. Where are you going to get a quick $1 billion if you need to destabilize a Southeast Asian country? It's not easy to push together a quick $1 billion off the books. There's only one business in the world that can do that, the dope business. And, criminal syndicalism, both government-sponsored and self-organized, has been using drugs as a foil for a very long time. If we were to make drugs legal, the major consequence of that, from the point of view of the people who rule this planet, is that it would be very hard to finance clandestine covert operations to influence the course of governments in history. It turns out it has nothing to do with what drugs do to you. It turns out it's a money issue.
And that's all it's ever been, Terrence, is a money issue. Money and control. I would say money and control, but also fear, also lies, also nonsense. We were talking earlier about Harry Anslinger, and let's just go to a little Harry Anslinger reading on the way out of the show. This is so funny to me. This is called Marijuana, Assassin of Youth. And we picked this up last week, but check this out. In numerous communities, it thrives almost unmolested, largely because of official ignorance of its effects. Marijuana is the unknown quantity among narcotics. No one knows when he smokes it, whether he will become a philosopher, a joyous reveler, a mad insensate, or a murderer. The young girl's story is typical. She had heard the whisper, which has gone the rounds of American youth, about a new thrill, a cigarette with a real kick, which gave wonderful reactions and no harmful after effects. With some friends, she experimented at an evening smoking party. The results were weird. Some of the partiers went into paroxysms of laughter. Others of mediocre musical ability became almost expert. The piano dinned constantly. Still others found themselves discussing weighty problems with remarkable clarity. The girl danced without fatigue throughout a night of inexplicable exhilaration. Other parties followed. Finally, there came a gathering at a time when the girl was behind in her studies and greatly worried. Suddenly, as she was smoking, the thought of a solution to her school problems came. Without hesitancy, she walked to a window and leaped to her death. Thus madly can marijuana solve one's problems. It gives few warnings of what it intends to do to the human brain, like help it out with CTE. But last year, a young girl, a marijuana addict, was hanged in Baltimore for criminal assault on a 10-year-old girl. In Chicago, 2 marijuana-smoking boys murdered a policeman. In Florida, police found a youth staggering about in a human slaughterhouse. With an axe, he had killed his father, his mother, 2 brothers, and a sister. He had no recollection of having committed this multiple crime. Ordinarily a sane, rather quiet young man, he had become crazed from smoking marijuana. Or so Harry Anslinger told us. Thanks for listening to Green Crush Conspiracy Queries with Alan Park. We will be back next week.